Welcome to another episode of Delay the Decay. Today my guest is Jason Janz. Jason was the founding pastor of Providence Bible Church and is now co-founder and CEO of Cross Purpose, a Denver nonprofit serving about 3,000 families annually across 4 locations. Cross Purpose seeks to abolish economic, relational, and spiritual poverty and help families pursue lasting prosperity and human flourishing. The mission is personal to Jason. He grew up in poverty, and he and his wife, Jennifer, raised their 4 sons in the Denver neighborhood where they've served for nearly 2 decades. He's a co-author of the forthcoming book, Together We Climb, which challenges individuals, churches, businesses, and communities to move beyond simply distributing aid and to create lasting pathways out of poverty. Jason, welcome to Delay the Decay.
Hey, Dan, it's a joy to be on your show, and I'm pleasured to be a guest. And however I contribute, I want to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, we were just talking before the episode where when we first met, you had a real impact on my life when I was a younger pastor, where I had visited your church, and you had heard that there was a bit of a crisis in our church. And you didn't know me at all, but you got wind of it. You invited me up. You let me share a little bit, which is always dangerous when you give somebody the mic, and you prayed for me. So thanks again for just modeling hospitality and kingdom-mindedness.
Yeah, Dan, thank you for that. I now recall that event. I think churches get pretty caught up in we're small, how do we change the world and stuff? And I love what Mother Teresa says is don't worry about the numbers. Love one person at a time and start with the person right in front of you. And it's man, somebody in our town, in our state, had a tragedy happen in their church building, and that would be a rough time. So I've just kind of followed that as a maxim, and the Lord brings you into moments with people all the time, and you just got to obey in the moment.
Yeah, that's thank you again. This podcast, Delay the Decay, is we are speaking to ambitious builders and creators, men and women who God has put something in them to build a business, to build a ministry, to build a family legacy, yet without losing their life. It's so easy to have ambition without prioritizing God and other people first, and then stewarding your body and your mind. And people might ask, well, Jason has quite a resume. He has been a pastor of a church. He's built Cross Purpose. What does that have to do with me? And ladies and gentlemen, it has everything to do with you and me, because any blessing God has given us financially, in our business, in our ministry, in our family, He's given it so that we can be a blessing to others. And Jason has modeled that, and I want to talk about what God has been doing in Cross Purpose through Jason and his wife, and how so many people who had no hope are finding hope in Jesus, and they're finding hope in having jobs and starting businesses. So that's where we're headed today, and I'm super excited about it. But before we get there, there's one question that I ask all my guests. And Jason, what is one habit or discipline that you've been incorporating into your life recently to keep you moving up and to the right?
Yeah, I would say on the you gave me 5 categories in the pre-call information here, and one of them was relational. And honestly, it's been the last 7 or 8 years where I actually intentionally built time to invest in friendships, and especially with men that I've been friends with for over 30 years. And one of those key men just was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And so we've been on a journey. We actually do a podcast together called The Dead Man Talking. And we've now done about close to 30 episodes. But the crew just all came out to Denver this past weekend, and we spent some magical days together. I tried to create a day here in Colorado that the guys at the end of the day were saying it's the best day ever. And of course, it's not hard to give someone a best day in Colorado, especially when you're coming from Wisconsin and Tennessee.
Yeah.
Because I just brag about Colorado all the time. So we went up to the mountains. We went to these beautiful meadows. We hiked. We fished. We We ate a stupendous catered meal, and we shared our words with my friend who's passing away that we were going to share at the funeral. And it was a snot fest. So I would say, especially if there's men on this call, like, don't wait for others to pick up the phone call to develop deep friendships. On the spiritual side, I would say I've been trying to engage the prayer of Examen in the evenings, where you basically review your day as you go to bed. What were the signs of consolation in my life, and what were the signs of desolation in my life? What is tomorrow? And giving it over to God as I close my eyes at night. And I'm not super consistent with it. I probably need to do your crazy 40 or whatever you call it and like go after that. But it is a way to go to sleep that you kind of like lower your anxiety and can rest.
Yeah, that's really good. Thanks for that. We are in a couple of weeks. I'm interviewing a sleep expert, somebody that actually is an expert in sleep, and she's got some. I can't wait for it because so many of us have a hard time going to sleep, staying asleep, and I feel like actually rhythms. I don't know if that was your motive, but sometimes just being thankful and reviewing our day and giving it to God can help us sleep better.
Yeah, I agree.
Along with melatonin. But what was going on in your life that made you 8 years ago where you just said, you know what, I'm going to be more intentional with my friendships?
I just realized like guys tend to lose relational connection in their 30s and 40s. And, all of us, we hit that midlife wall. And I just thought, I would see good friends from college once every 2 or 3 years, and hey, let's spend an afternoon together. Let's go to dinner. But we weren't getting deeper with one another. And I thought we're actually I don't know if we're gonna go to each other's funerals. We would call each other our friends, but it was really small F friendship. And so I texted them all and said, hey, I want to have an hour phone call with you over Christmas break and catch up on your life. And none of them texted me back. So I texted him back and I said, if you don't text me within the next 24 hours, I'm breaking up with you for life. And they all texted me back. We had a great phone call. And then I thought, now what? And so then I started a monthly Zoom call. We do an annual retreat where we get together, those kind of things. And it's just been delightful.
That's wonderful. I've reconnected with some older friends recently. Yes, they are older, but old friends recently. And I'm always curious, like, what is it that brought you guys together? Like back in the day, what bound you guys? Was it sports? Was it God? Was it girls? Was it disco? What was it?
Yeah, for my friends, it was ministry school. So I would say you have joint time / experiences together, or usually joint suffering. And if you have those, you usually develop friendships in those spaces. But they don't naturally maintain themselves. I mean, was it Kenny Rogers that saying you can't make old friends?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. Really good. Before you became a pastor and a church planter and a nonprofit leader, you were a young man who experienced poverty. You experienced a foreclosure on a home, financial scarcity. I would imagine that there was a shame attached to that. Take us into that story, Jason. How did growing up in poverty shape the man that Jason is today, your ministry, and now, when you were a pastor, now you're a nonprofit leader? How did that shape it?
Yeah, I was born in the Midwest, and my dad had a business that failed, and we lost our home, and my dad had his wages garnished, and by the last month we were in Wisconsin, we only had enough wages to pay the rent from his job. And so we need to get a fresh start. Poverty, if you would have told me what that is, I couldn't have told you as a 11-year-old kid. But there was some shame because you didn't have the clothes. I didn't always have the stuff other kids had. Often told no, at the grocery store counter checkout because we didn't have the money. People knew we were kind of without, and so they would drop off groceries the church members would drop off groceries at our front doorstep, ring the doorbell, and then drive away. But I would love that because they'd have Captain Crunch cereal and Lucky Charms, and I never had sugar cereals. We had cinnamon toast, so that's what poverty felt like to me. But I felt like there was this like glass wall between me and the rest of the world, and like I didn't know how to access the other side of that wall. And other people on the other side of the wall looked like they were having fun, flying in airplanes, driving nice cars, but that wasn't my life. Then we moved so my dad said we need to get a fresh start. So we moved to Denver in 1985. And so then we quickly moved, I would say, into middle class life there. But from the time as early as I can remember till about middle school, we were in poverty. And I think of poverty, sometimes people think of that, they think of an economic condition. I think it's human suffering on certain levels. Like you're the inability to provide food, clothing, and shelter and security for your family. And so that developed then an empathy for others who suffer. And I have a high sensitivity to human suffering.
Yeah. Did you have that? Was that innate? Is that something God put in you before you experienced it as well? Or did that empathy come after experiencing it?
I don't know.
Okay. You don't recall back?
No. Because I remember being without from the moment I have my earliest memory. So
okay.
I don't know where that comes from. I do know this, that when I experience somebody in suffering, I actually have a physical feeling in the center of my chest. So sometimes the problem is I can actually overhelp somebody because I'm so compelled to try to alleviate the suffering.
I imagine Jesus, in his sovereignty, had that same feeling in his chest when he saw a leper or he saw a prostitute ready to be stoned. I feel like that is actually the heart of Jesus.
Well, it says he was moved with compassion. Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You spent years in pastoral ministry. You were a pastor before you planted Providence. Is that correct?
Yeah. I often say I'm a social entrepreneur trapped in a pastor's body. So I went off to ministry school. I was raised in a denominational background where, the good Christians went off into vocational ministry, and the rest of the people went to the marketplace and just gave money to make the ministry work. So I wanted to be a good Christian, so I surrendered to ministry work and went off to ministry school and became a pastor back in my home church in the suburbs of Denver. And I was there for 11 years, but as an assistant pastor, but really felt I was not happy with how we had the social impact we were having in neighborhoods or our care for the poor. And so the church went through a large relocation campaign, and I just kind of soured on kind of like a building-centric, Sunday-centric model of ministry. That's my family. I love those people, but I wanted to do something different as I started getting to my mid-30s in my life that was more in line with, I felt like, the heart God had put in me.
Mm-hmm. Did they send you out, or did you just, it was time to go and started Providence on your own?
Yeah, I was sent as a missionary from that church. And, I was married and had 4 boys under the age of 10. And they gave us, a good send-off and a year of a couple $100 a month to support us. And we went and raised other kind of support to try to make it work.
Why Providence? Why'd you name the church Providence?
Nobody asked me that question, so that's great. The state motto of Colorado is nothing without Providence. Nil sine numine. And
no way.
It's in the state seal. So in 1876, when they founded this state, the people that were making the decision, there's some interesting stories around it, basically looked around and said, nothing here happens without the hand of God. And so I'm not sure necessarily that that's the predominant feeling in the state house today, although I am friends with the president of the Senate, and I know he's a man of God. And so I just say Providence wanted to be part of making sure that statement was loud and clear in the heart of the city.
Well, there you go. I am a born and raised Colorado native, and I had no idea. So thank you.
Well, did you know that there's a pastor in the Capitol Dome? You got Kit Carson, you got some famous Coloradans, but you've got John Dyer, who is a Methodist minister called the Snowshoe Itinerant.
In Leadville.
He would go in his snowshoes and preach in the mining camps.
And he's on the dome.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's quite a legacy.
Yep.
Yeah. So you planted Providence Bible Church. 11 years in the other church. You planted Providence because you cared about human suffering, and you wanted to put yourself right in the middle of it. What was going on in your life that that sermons and programs and good intentions just didn't solve the problem that you were itching to solve?
Yeah, I think the Western church is really married to a cognitive model of discipleship and formation. And that's like, to me, that's the playbook of how you go about it. But the real stuff is going out and doing. I mean, you look at Jesus when he called the disciples, the first thing they did is they went and did something. They didn't sit in a 12-hour accreditation seminar on how to handle crowds at a healing event. They just went and did it. And that's how we all learn anyway. But the church has, I think, adopted kind of this Western intellectual model of discipleship. And it's not bad. It's just incomplete without the action. I mean, James 2 is like, pretty solid about this. And so my wife and I had started a recovery program at that church, and we ran that for 5 years. And that's where I just saw, like, yes, you need good Bible truth, but yes, you also need accountability. And yes, you need to encourage people. And yes, you need to help the whole person if you're going to actually see a transformational outcome in their life. But I also, the key part, I like one of our co-founders, Juan Pena, says, we started Providence to save our own souls. It was actually more about us getting our lives aligned with God's heart for the poor than it was us coming in to do any saving of the poor, if that makes sense. Totally. We wanted to be somewhere where our faith, we could live out what we were seeing in Scripture.
Mm-hmm. And that took root in a deeper root in your heart and the heart of the other leaders and elders.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is context, right? Is you have to go to where the people are. And so that allowed us to say, where is the center of the economic hardship? Where is the center of diversity in our state? And so in the 2000 census, that center of diversity in the state was the 5 Points neighborhood. And so that's where we chose to move ourselves and also to start the ministry. And it's also where the houses were the cheapest. That's all we could afford. Yeah. And so about 5 couples got together, and 4 of those couples are still around 18 years later.
Wow.
In the same neighborhood doing the same work.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I know that, poverty moves. I've been in Denver a long time, and it moves. It's been moving east, and it's because of gentrification. Any off the cuff thoughts on gentrification?
Yeah, I mean, gentrification is the process whereby the middle to upper class move into impoverished neighborhoods, fix up their houses, property values go up, and then the poor, the rent goes up on them, and they have to move out. There's sort of displacement. What began gentrification in Denver was the Coors Field being put downtown, and that kind of began that journey. We were then, I think, the 9th fastest gentrifying neighborhood in the country at one point when we were planting. And so, I've never seen an American neighborhood stop gentrification. I like how Robert Lupton talks about gentrification with justice. Like, can we do it in a way that doesn't displace the poor? And can the gentry move in and say, how can we serve the neighborhood versus how can the neighborhood serve us? Because that's sometimes what motivates the gentry is they want to make money off of real estate.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen that happen? Gentrification with justice?
Oh, I see it all the time. I mean, I see good people that, first they'll have to start with listening and understanding the history of the neighborhood. I mean, I just took people this morning through the neighborhood to show them the red line where the federal government would not back bank loans for African Americans who wanted to buy a house, and which then deprived them of generations of generational wealth and capital from home equity. And so I took people and showed them the actual line that our neighborhood association had repainted so that they understand like why the neighborhood looks the way it looks and why certain people have been excluded from the economy and why it's important for us as Christians to do the repair to help people be able to access the American dream that wasn't afforded them because of discriminatory housing law.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's we could just go on and on, but there's a city that my son lives in the Kansas City area called Prairie Village. And Prairie Village used to have I don't know if it's bylaws, but people of color could not buy a house. They were actually left out of there, which I'm sure that's, and it's not all about race. I understand that, but there still is a class of people that don't have the same opportunities as we do.
And I think if you don't understand that, you don't understand the neighborhood, you don't understand the access to capital problem. But if you're a Christian, you actually fundamentally believe in repairing harm, and you actually fundamentally believe in loving your neighbor. But the Good Samaritan not only bound up this stranger and took him to get care, he paid for his housing and health care so he could get back on his feet. So I like what Tim Keller says is the biblical idea of justice is to help somebody until the need is met. And so why would we not love people all the way to where they could own a home and achieve the American dream that hasn't been available to them?
I love it. We're going to talk a little bit more as we go along about what the church can do differently today. Maybe Big C Church. But I want to first talk about Tiffany. You've talked about Tiffany. She had an impact on you and your family. What did Tiffany and other neighbors teach you about poverty that you may not have learned without those beautiful people?
Yeah, in the book that I just wrote, we share the story of Tiffany, who's our literal next door neighbor. When we moved into the neighborhood, we were pretty naive around issues of race and class. And Tiffany had grown up in the neighborhood. And so she was living in economic poverty. I mean, working at the local Walmart, just changing oil. And she had been super faithful there for over a decade, but she wasn't on a ladder to get to where she deserved to be. She was very smart, had a management mindset. And I thought she should be making 3 times the money she's making. Well, her and my wife became friends, living next door to each other. And they actually started a ministry in the neighborhood, the single moms together. But I started hearing Tiffany's, of course, I started caring about her and her daughter. And so I started hearing her economic journey and said, how does she not just live in poverty? How does she get out of poverty? And everything I had heard about poverty alleviation, food, clothing, backpacks, bikes, Christmas gifts, like none of that was actually going to solve that problem. That's a relief problem or a relief solution to what's needed as a development problem. And so that's what got me thinking we need to rethink poverty and Christian charity and how it's even framed up. And I just feel like we stop. Our belief is that the number one social problem in America is poverty, and the solutions that are proposed are usually fragmented and insufficient.
There's at some point during this podcast, I'm probably going to embarrass me and you by shedding some tears because it's an emotional subject for me, and we don't walk in shame, and I don't even know that we walk in regret. But there's certain things I feel like that maybe we do a bit different. And even though just being a pastor in a white upper middle class area, there's just trying to move the needle and change hearts, even in my heart, even to really do more than just throwing money or maybe just serving at a food bank, even though money is necessary and food banks are necessary. I grew up in Denver, and when I was a financial consultant in downtown Denver, I served on the board of the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And the reason I did that is that I've always cared about the underdog, those who didn't grow up the same way I grew up in middle class Wheat Ridge in western Denver. And so like when you moved in next to Tiffany, you didn't just you helped her get on her feet. Would you talk about that? Like, how did you started a ministry with her? Sounds like you saw her as an equal with you, not somebody to save or to be served. In some way, she saved your life. Is that an overstatement?
Yeah. No, I think that's right on. First of all, Dan, I just want to say thank you to you for serving with the coalition. That's a good organization. I mean, literally, without the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, the Denver Rescue Mission, Catholic Charities, Urban Peak, Denver now has the host services at the city. Like without those type of organizations, like people would be suffering to a far greater degree. So whether you harbor, guilt, shame, or whatever, I just thank you for at least plugging in and serving in that way.
Absolutely.
The
Thank you.
the With Tiffany, yeah, I think it's really important that we both, when we interact with people who are of a different economic class, that we develop a reciprocal relationship and we stand on equal ground. Otherwise, it just develops into this toxic paternalism, which has been super unhealthy, and we've seen a lot of patterns of that globally and locally, and we could all kind of fall into those patterns. But so with Tiffany, what I felt like doing is saying, I mean, it really was the advent of cross purpose, but it was very unconventional. We started our first class, and she joined the class, but her obstacle, she didn't need more training. She just needed an access to an opportunity. And I just said to her one day, I said, "Hey, Tiffany, like I shop at the Walmart you work at, and it's kind of a mess. It's like the number one center of crime in Denver. Like you literally can walk in, and at one time you could grab a vacuum and walk out and they would not arrest you. Yeah, it's bad. And I shop there, so like it's kind of a mess." So I said, "They should put you on the floor to be a shift manager." And she said, "Well, I don't think my boss even notices me." And I said, "Well, let me go talk to him." And she goes, "Would you do that?" And I thought, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe that was a dumb offer. But she's like, "I'd love for you to go talk to my boss." And I was like, well, that's kind of weird, but I like, yeah, let's go. So I go and met Tom. And Tom said, I would put her on the floor in a heartbeat, but she's got two issues. She needs to smile more. And when someone tries to steal a battery from us by returning a battery that's not ours, she gets in a moral argument with them. She just needs to let them steal from Walmart and get the line moving. And so I said, "Tiffany, are you okay with letting them steal from Walmart?" And she said, "I guess." Well, Tom goes out with cancer, but then he comes back and he returns as like the regional manager of Starbucks and hires her to run a Starbucks store. She does it such a good job. FedEx recruits her out of that store to run the FedEx across from the Walmart she used to work at. She becomes the seventh most profitable store in the country. First Black woman to run a FedEx store in Colorado. I mean, she just smoked it. And,
Wow.
now she's a logistics manager for Public Storage, makes really good money, bought her home. I'm just so proud of her. She's now on the Cross Purpose board, so she's technically my boss. Yeah, and that's just been such a beautiful journey for both of us. You probably should have her on the podcast to talk.
Oh,
She's a tough testimony of light.
You're pastoring a church, preaching a sermon on Sundays, I would imagine, and maybe starting some programs along the way, and then cross purpose is happening. At what point did you realize that you couldn't remain simply another church ministry? Cross purpose couldn't remain just another church ministry. And when did you decide to take it outside the church?
2012, we incorporated as a separate nonprofit from the church. And we had started a bunch of ministries of the church, but we actually realized that this type of intervention around poverty, moving upstream to solve the finance issue, and rather than downstream working on housing and food and childcare and transportation and all that, if you got money, you can take care of all those things, right? So let's go solve the money problem. So that just became the North Star. So we formed a separate organization in 2012. And then I just ran that with our team. And we've done that for the last 15 years.
Okay. What did you have to unlearn about running a church in order to run a ministry of the scope and scale of cross purpose?
It wasn't unlearning for me. It was learning. I mean, I literally, now is running an organization. We say we operate with the mind of a business and the heart of a nonprofit. But, managing staff, managing budgets, filing tax returns, putting up with, understanding nonprofit law, growing, understanding grants and public funding and how to raise money and how to raise serious philanthropy. All of those things, plus just your intervention, right? Like most nonprofits haven't, in my opinion, thought deeply enough about their intervention. and they usually measure their impact by activities versus what I'd call the transformational outcome. And so I was mentored by a businessman who said, Jason, I want to help you develop an outcomes-based nonprofit, not an activities-based nonprofit. And that made all the difference in the world. So we don't take any credit for training in financial literacy, no credit for how good they look in their job photo or their LinkedIn profile. If they don't get a job, we failed at our work with them. And so they have to get money in their pocket if we're going to solve the poverty problem. So that changed everything because he would only give me philanthropy for the outcome. He goes, I don't care how many people come in the front door. It's how many people on the graduation stage. That's how I'm going to distribute my philanthropy.
Yeah. I feel like well, you said it, but I feel like it's very rare for a nonprofit to be outcome focused or have KPIs, if you will. Do you even use some of those type of terms?
Yeah, I mean, we use the EOS model of management for the organization. We have KPIs, OKRs, and I learn all of it. I tell people, like, first time I heard EBITDA, I thought that was a Jewish holiday I had never studied. Margin, cost of goods sold. Like, I had to just learn like crazy. I mean, the best thing I did was I joined a CEO peer group that met every Friday for 8 hours. And it was like my ongoing MBA. And I just asked a ton of dumb questions. And the people in that CEO group were wonderful. I'm still part of that group after 8 years because it was transformative for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's probably a good word for every nonprofit leader to get in the circles with some business leaders for sure.
Yeah, I think the nonprofit is a business. It has to do everything a business has to do. In fact, I will say this, and I don't mind going toe to toe. It's much harder to run a nonprofit than a for-profit. I mean, if you think of a for-profit and you're making toothbrushes, you get an investment, you make the toothbrushes, you go sell them, you recycle the capital, you buy more materials. And if you can do that really well, you've got this really wonderful cycle. The nonprofit, you got to go get free cash that you put into the intervention. You create a social return on investment, but you don't get any money back into the beginning. You have to go find more free cash. So you really need 2 sales cycles in your business because you've got to find the cash and the participant. I mean, if you're thinking in business terms, right? It's really hard. Secondly, there's no ownership incentives to run a nonprofit, right? There's no exit strategy. There's no golden parachute, right? Then everybody thinks because you're a do-gooder, you should make less money than the non-do-gooders. And so now you have less compensation. And then you got a governance structure where you don't really have a vote. You're governed by a board that can fire you tomorrow. I mean, who would take this job?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
So anyway, that's my thing is like the nonprofits in this town are run by really good leaders who have a lot of constraints that have been put on them by the system.
Would you call yourself, before planting a church and before cross purpose, an entrepreneur? Like, you feel like either you knew it at that time, like, God's given me this wiring to start things, or did you just kind of understand that was in you as you took the next step?
Yeah, I've been starting things since I was a kid, but I never knew what an entrepreneur was. So okay. I feel like now, though, I had this conversation with God where most entrepreneurs are always starting something, building it, then they kind of move on to the next thing, and they got that kind of like, they get that startup high. But I was like, the people I really respected were the people that actually stuck at something for 30 and 40 and 50 years. And I was like, it's different to do a startup company versus a legacy institution. And in the game of justice, we need more legacy institutions and less, one generation type efforts. And so I've just asked the Lord, I would love to give 30 to 40 years of my life to one thing. But as my board knows, I am a creative person. So as long as I'm creating something new within that sandbox, I can stay pretty interested. And obviously, if we're trying to solve the number one social problem, there's a ton of stuff we haven't figured out yet. So we're still building, tweaking, trying to grow and perfect what we're trying to do.
I know you've got relationship with peers in other states, but do you see for lack of a better term, a franchise model to help this what God has allowed you all to do here to do it in other places, other states?
Yeah, we have 11 other cities that have copied our model that are part of what we call our national network. We just had 6 more cities with us yesterday. Austin, Texas was here, Grand Junction, Colorado Springs, Charlotte, North Carolina, Farmington, New Mexico. We're all here to look at, man, is this something that we want to do? So we're working on the model right now. It's kind of like open source software. You can have it. God bless you. We'll help you, and we maybe do some consulting with you. But it's really, really hard work.
Well, isn't anything good really, really hard work?
Yeah, my mentor, who is our founding philanthropist, said, Jason, everything I've ever done is hard.
Yeah. Well, you didn't want to hear that answer.
It was actually liberating. If you're going to do something good, nothing's going to be easy about it.
For sure. So your book, Together We Climb, is coming in October. Is that right?
Yeah, the official publication date is October 13th. They can pre-order it on Amazon.
Okay.
And, I've got some paperback copies that have been sent to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the book.
But they can pre-order now on Amazon.
Yeah, and it'll be on Audible and Kindle as well.
Beautiful. I like some of the illustrations that you use in the book where you talk about the familiar proverb of giving somebody a fish. Rather than give them a fish, you teach them to fish. But you guys took it to a whole nother level. Give them a good pole and ultimately help them own a pond. Don't give them a fish, teach them to fish, give them a pole, and help them own a pond. Walk us through the mountain model. Why is teaching someone to fish still insufficient if they lack access to quality work, relationships, capital, and ownership? Why is that such a driving force for you in Cross Purpose?
Yeah, that proverb is an old Chinese proverb, and usually when I teach somewhere on poverty, somebody will say to me, hey, Jason, I don't believe in just giving someone a fish. That feeds them for a day. But if you teach them to fish, you feed them for life. And I just got thinking about that. And Robert Lupton out of Atlanta had talked about owning the pond. I've actually had people talk to me since the book about zoning the pond. We got to zone the pond so that people can actually build a home in this town. So I just started thinking through it, and there's a lot of job training, but it's not converting to good jobs. So the third step, the actual wording is equip with a good pole. So we equip them so that they can actually get not just a poll, but a good poll. You can look up the Good Jobs Initiative, what makes a good job, because it was Julie Stone with a foundation here in town, and she came up to me and she said, Jason, if all you do is wage growth, you are spinning your wheels. Black Americans own 0.5% of the nation's wealth in 1865. We're 150 years down the road, and they own 1.5% of the nation's wealth. And it's because all we've done is wage growth. She goes, we must do wealth building, and wealth is the metric of justice. I mean, it was like a Mack truck. I mean, this is a woman of God who speaks prophetically. And I knew she was right because our grads were actually getting jobs, but then they were losing their benefits, so their food stamps or their TANF or their WIC or their Section 8 apartment, and they were still having struggles, and they didn't make enough money to buy a home. They were making enough to pay for their apartment, but sometimes even the government safety net is a disincentive for them to actually take raises at work and stuff. It's called the benefits cliff. So I knew that all the people we had learned to love that had graduated from the give a fish world, the teach fish, and they actually had a good poll, we needed one more step and say, we actually want you, we want to stop generational poverty and create intergenerational wealth. That would be the ball game. And I think that's what long-term love in the same direction looks like with a neighbor. We do it with our own kids, right? We make sure our kids go up all 4 steps. We give them fish till they're 18. We hope they go to college and we teach them to fish till they're 22. Then we want them getting a good job, and we usually call a friend and ask if they'll employ our son. And then we want to help them get a down payment on a home because that's the American dream, and that's the way most people build wealth in this country. So I say, Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. I say, love your neighbor the way you love your son. the world would change, right? Where we take responsibility for one person in poverty to love them all the way.
All the way. I love that. Yeah, it feels like the a lot of times we're focused on spiritual capital, which is important, but we don't always think about the relational capital or the economic capital, at least from the church context.
Yeah, definitely. The church overemphasizes the spiritual capital. The workforce development boards overemphasize the economic capital. Almost nobody even understands the relational or social capital. And that's actually some of the most powerful capital you can build because it's not what you know, it's who you know. And so our model, Putnam had the book on this with Bowling Alone in the mid 80s. He talked about most social capital is bonding social capital like on like. The most powerful social capital is bridging social capital, where you know people who are different than you. That's where you really get to leverage your relationships for change. And so that's part of our own model there is to create that type of social capital. And we don't ignore the spiritual capital. I mean, it was Father Boyle out of Homeboy Industries in LA, the largest gang intervention program in the world, who said if we don't help people heal from the core wound of their life, they will actually get the job. Somebody will say a word that triggers them. They'll walk out. They're back in poverty, not because they can't do the skill and run the chop saw. They just haven't healed from the core wound of their life. So we say, I like how he says that we're a therapeutic environment of tenderness and care.
That's really good. Hey, I want to double click on human flourishing because it's a phrase that you use. It's a phrase other people use as well, and I think that's what you've been talking about. But how would you describe human flourishing, and why is that really our mandate?
Yeah, look at the context of the human flourishing as the goal is people think, well, all you're trying to do is get people jobs so they can buy a home and just be wealthy people. Isn't that what's wrong with the world? It's like, no. First of all, most people that are saying that are usually people of means, right? There's a true tie between personal happiness and the amount of income people make till they make about $100,000 a year. So money does buy happiness. That might be the great heresy of the day for people in the struggle, because it's not fun when you cannot take your daughter to get her teeth fixed and she's screaming in pain and she's in human suffering, but you don't have the money to do that. You are not a happy person, right? Money will help your happiness and make your daughter have the proper health care needed. But what does the top of the mountain look like? It's just not me owning the pond, owning my home, having a 401k, and starting my business, because we all know you can be empty while you do that. Harvard put out the largest study on this with the Harvard Human Flourishing Study. I was just at Harvard this past year at a Human Flourishing Day where we were talking about flourishing at work. And they have their 6 rungs of human flourishing that they talk about. At Cross Purpose, we really talk about the 3 forms of capital, and that then produces somebody who genuinely has a fulfilled life. Sometimes I use the American dream because in America we talk about in the American dream, for most people, they're talking about freedom. They want the freedom to do what they want to do. They want fulfillment in their life. They want to feel like their life has meaning, but then they also have the finances necessary so they're not living in human suffering. And that is a flourishing life for somebody. I'm free, I have fulfillment, and I have the finances necessary for me and my family to survive and not suffer. So that's the goal. And I think if they also realize that at the very top of the mountain, we take all of our families through a 7-week course on generosity so that we cultivate the generous gene inside of them. Honestly, the people in our program are the most generous people I've ever met in my life. Oh my gosh, they will just give you the shirt off their back. But now we sit there and say, now you're going to be making more money, continue to be generous, and you'll be a testimony to the world. And we have a donor who, when they complete those 7 weeks, will give them a trip, all expenses paid, to one of 20 different countries to go see good work being done in the developing world. So that's kind of the full circle of the mountain journey. And then they also have to take somebody else up the mountain in the program.
God, that's amazing. Did I just read that you guys, you just recently had a Shark Tank type experience?
Yeah, we don't call them sharks. We call them dolphins because they're a lot nicer than those guys on Shark Tank. Our graduates have an opportunity if they want to start a business or a nonprofit to enter a 9-month accelerator that we call the Change Agency. And they take basically what I'd call minimum viable idea to a minimum pitchable idea. And then we fill the DCPA downtown with about 700 people, and they get 5 minutes to pitch their business or nonprofit. And we raise philanthropic capital to help them start their business or nonprofit. It's not an equity position. It's not a loan, because if it doesn't work out, we don't want them in debt. And they'll raise on that night between $10,000 and $50,000 of capital for their venture. We just raised $40,000 for Patmos. Patmos he disassembles car parts, sends them back to his home country of Ghana, sells them at a markup, and the money he's making, he's buying land to start a cross purpose in Ghana called the Freeway Career Center. But he stole the show at the last the pitch night we did 2 years ago. But this year we just launched 8 new ventures in May at the pitch night event.
So fun. Wow. That's got to be so rewarding, Jason, to see those lives changed.
Oh, it's one of my coaches said, the problem is all these people care too much and they don't think too much about making money. They just want to go help people. One of our grads has 140 peer coaches in her nonprofit that she started to help men and women coming incarceration with support. Wow. 140 staff.
That's
amazing.
And
she was living in poverty 4 years ago.
Is it a nonprofit as well?
Yes. Yep.
That's spectacular. Wow. I want to ask you about health. You get these people to the top of the mountain. Do they also have the tools on how to delay the decay, which is our motto? That, and Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 that even though the outer human is decaying, the inner human is being renewed day by day, and this decay is we're aging, and we can accelerate the decay by things like diabetes and obesity and that type of thing. Is that part of it as well?
Yeah, I think if you believe in holistic care, and as people of God, you have to believe your body's a temple, and you have one body, and your job is to take care of it, obviously. And so I would say sometimes in impoverished neighborhoods, if I'm working 2 jobs and I'm coming home late at night and I got 2 kids and I got to get them in bed, they stop and get the dollar menu from McDonald's. The kids like it, and it's just convenient and it's there, right? So we started bringing in one of our board members. She runs an organization called the Whole Health Partners. And she was a nurse for a long time and felt like she was always just doing ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, picking up the bodies, and said, let's build the fence at the top. And so she started a health program inside Cross Purpose. It's an opt-in only program, but they teach them kind of the basics and fundamentals of health. We found out when we did the testing with our families, half of them were in a pre-diabetic diet at stage of life. So that means they had been living a diabetic lifestyle, a diabetic diet for up to 10 years. I think it was between 30 and 40% had undiagnosed hypertension, high blood pressure. So it was undiagnosed, therefore untreated. So because they don't have access to healthcare. So she's now starting to see significant changes. In fact, she just gave me the data back that we have actually seen clinical depression scores go down in 25% of the participants without a medical intervention. You realize that, no pills to solve your depression. It's being solved through community and relationship, right? So these are the things that I think a more full-orbed look at the healthcare issue is going to really help us, because, I would ask somebody who's struggling and not keeping their health in order, is there a social emotional problem attached to this that needs some healing as well? And then I do want to say we all have some people in our lives that no matter how much help you give them, seem to not take advantage of it. We say at Cross Purpose, we don't help people who need help. We help people who want help. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't call us to continue to help somebody. Um, and it's more about us and our detoxing from our success syndrome that everybody we've got to help needs to turn around and be a success story or we get mad. It might just be God showing us what long-term love looks like for somebody who's really suffering.
Yeah. You reminded me of something I've said recently when people ask me, do you miss being a pastor? And do you enjoy what you're doing now? And my answer, it offends some people, but I'll say it anyways, is that I get to do some of the similar things in my coaching as I did as a pastor. But the people that are paying me need help and they want to make the change. When I was a pastor, I felt like I would do lots of counseling and whatnot, but not everybody really wanted to change. And there's something about having skin in the game, whether that be your time or your money. Those are the people that we want to invest in, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think coaching is great. I have a coach that I meet with all the time, and I pay that coach. But on some side, there's nothing like the local church, where you're seeing people long term over decades if it's done correctly, and you're in relationship with them. Because actually, there are times when I am pretty unattractive to a pastor, I'm sure, where I'm not doing what I should be. I mean, I'm that person on the side of the road that needs the help. That's the beauty of the church, is you have a community that can be with you through all those seasons of life, even when you're not the best version of yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I needed that. Thanks for sharing that truth bomb. Churches and individuals oftentimes are generous with their resources, with their money, and maybe with their times. When I pastored a church, we had a backpack drive with Weld County Foster Care, and we worked with Serve 6.8, and good organizations. But how do we discern when our aid, our money, and our time is simply stabilizing people rather than helping them actually climb the mountain?
Well, I think there are times when people need just relief care and they just need to be settled, where we can help minimize the suffering. And once we can minimize the suffering, I think we can start working on the mountain. But if somebody's sleeping in their car in the winter, that's human suffering. And I think there needs to be no guilt about helping that person get into a safe and warm place where they're cared for and someone's watching out for them. And that's needed, I think, all the time in every community in the world. And then I think we sit there and we can say to somebody, "Do you want to do what's necessary to help you not have to get into the situation again?" And then I think I would call it high accountability, high support type intervention, and saying, "I'm willing to help if you're willing to be accountable, and I will be willing to support to this level," and begin that journey together and see how that works out. Obviously, at Cross Purpose, what I try to do is build the institution around that problem so that we can create subject matter experts, so to speak, so that the average volunteer can help, have a sounding board for the journey forward. So I would say it's bathed in wisdom and prayer. There are times where I feel led to give to somebody, and it doesn't make sense. But it's more about me letting go than it is about what's going to happen at the transaction.
Yeah. How might a pastor or a dad with his family or a mom with her family, how might they build this heart for human flourishing into the congregation or into the family, particularly in Windsor, Colorado, for example, or, in Golden, Colorado, where you're not in the middle of obvious human suffering day to day?
Well, I just think it's there. You just have to look a little bit harder. So we worked with Cherry Hills Community Church in Douglas County, Colorado, which is the ninth richest county, I think, in the country. It's the richest county west of the Mississippi. I think it's richer than San Jose. And they have 11,000 people living below the federal poverty guideline in Douglas County. So Parker has a food bank. So like everywhere you go in this country, there are people within a 15-minute drive who are living in poverty and are suffering. But I do think in the suburban context, sometimes you just have to look harder for that to find that. But they are there. They're around every corner. They're in every dense residential area you can imagine. And there's suffering that's going on there.
Yeah, thanks for that. I went to the Colorado Prayer Breakfast 2 years ago, and there was a young man, I think he was a Denver Bronco, that spoke with his wife, and they talked about having that there were homeless people, building communities right on the fringe of their nice, might have been Cherry Hills neighborhood, and most of the neighbors wanted them out, which is understandable at some level, but these particular neighbors moved towards these homeless people and actually invited them in. And how do you know when it's time to do that?
I would say there's no book on this. I was at that same luncheon with you and heard that story. I on some sense that can be extremely dangerous, especially if you have children. I'd be very cautious about doing that. And what I would do is I would lean on the experts who are around you who can help you make that decision. Obviously, that Denver Bronco player had the resource and the ability, and they knew enough to not feel like they were endangering their family. But we have institutions within almost every community that you could go to and say, hey, I'm actually open to helping somebody, but I would like to just not take somebody off the street that hasn't been vetted. But if I can really be a help, I'd like to. So I was at the Denver Rescue Mission today. They have a facility called The Crossing, and they have about 150-ish, I think, families or beds there. And those are people that they are trying to stabilize and get into employment. But once they leave there, they need a place to go. Well, to get first month's rent and security deposit for an apartment in Denver is about $4,000. So would there be an intermediate step there with a couple that has? I mean, there are 400,000 empty bedrooms in Denver, Colorado, in existing homes. I mean, we don't have a homeless problem; we have a compassion problem, right? So, would somebody be willing to say, "Hey, this family's hit all the marks here and done a really good job, and we think that would be a wonderful thing," and let them be there for 6 months, and then they're out of this cafeteria. They feel like they're in a home. They're acclimating to a neighborhood. And then, you know what? Love breaks out between those two families, and that's a beautiful thing. And then they can save more money. I think that's probably, if I was to say on a podcast where a lot of people are listening, is a better way, because what happens is I can tell you as many stories of that have gone bad and harm has been caused. And then that family never reaches out again because they've been so burned. They said, we don't know about this. We got too involved. And that hurts the cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. Do you guys, as part of your mission, equipping churches, like if there were a handful of churches that wanted to come down and spend a day down there and kind of see what you're doing and just get a vision for their community, do you do that?
Yeah, I did it today. We had 14 churches there today saying, how do we love our neighbor better? So I spent about 5 hours with those churches and talk through all the kind of questions that we're talking about here. I think there's a good number of churches that are realizing that their charity work is insufficient for the problems that they're seeing in their communities, and their values want to do something more substantive. They just don't know how to do it.
Okay, yeah. Do you do any advocating with the state at all, as far as changing policies, laws, zoning, that type of thing?
No, I mean, we work with the city, county, and the state pretty closely. And then what we do is we partner with people who are really good at that and say, hey, here's what we're seeing. And then the advocacy organizations kind of take that to the next level. We're not an advocacy organization, but we're friends with them.
Okay, very good. And then my final question for you today, I think, Jason, is, again, something that's pretty close to me is I've got a young man that we love a ton that has mental illness. And he is what? How do you even say it? He's committed a crime and has ended up in the penal system. and he really needs to be in the mental health system. And you've got the penal system, you got the mental health system, and they really don't work together. But when he comes out of jail, there's no place for him because he's not going to take his medication because he doesn't believe he's sick. How do you help people like that? How do you help people that are mentally ill?
Well, we shut down a lot of the facilities that did that work, and incarceration became our only option. So, this is where we need some systemic solutions to help some people. But because there was such a attitude against institutionalizing people, we kind of shut that down. So now they're on the street, either homeless, right, and causing harm, or they're incarcerated. We're spending $45,000 a year per incarcerated individual, and we're applying the wrong solution to the problem, as you've already highlighted. So it's what we need right now is wise political leadership at all levels of government. And the problem is, with the shouting matches going on and the savaging of our opponents, no good people want to do that job. And so, I have been graced with almost everybody I know in the political leadership in this city and state have been very charitable and kind individuals. I mean, I think they deeply care, and want to do good. But there are some winds that are hard to change. Just because you're in political office doesn't mean you have as much power as you think you have. So I do think that I like perplexing problems like this, because what would it be like for the church to help be a solution into these areas? I mean, let's think of the mission of the church. And if the church is a healing presence in neighborhoods, what would it be like for the church to wrap around a family or an individual and see what they can do to provide care?
Yeah, so good. Yeah, and you may have just answered this question well. I want to give you last word. Speak to pastors and other community leaders. Maybe the church has a benevolence fund. They take 15% of their budget. They set it aside for missions work, for compassion work. But there's very little on the relationship scale. It's mainly just giving money, maybe volunteering periodically, which is great. But what would you say to them? How do you help them take the next step?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I built Cross Purpose was there's a model in which the volunteers in Cross Purpose can actually get to know a family, develop a relationship in a safe environment and a nurturing environment, and actually see some transformational change over time. And I feel like if the average pastor were to see something like that as a model, it would tend to click more with them than simply the person who's knocking on the door needing help with their light bill, or just providing a meal in a park somewhere where you hear that the homeless congregate. I think there's a hunger to do more deep and meaningful walk with the poor. They just don't know how to do that. So I would probably advise people to go to their traditional rescue missions or interventions in people who are really trying to get off the street, and try to be the back end to that solution to help take people the next step. And there's a ton of work there. I was at the Denver Rescue Mission today, and one of the program managers cried in front of these 14 church leaders and says, "We need your help, because I want to see the residents here woven back into communities. I want to see them at Walmart when I go shopping. I need them in my life, but they need to go to places, and all I can do is get them ready for a transitional step back into community." And it was the most moving part of the day. So I think with a little bit of homework, there's a lot of work there to be done.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Made me think of an organization like Whiz Kids down in Denver, where they come alongside kids that are struggling in school. And the best part about that is the relationships, for sure. So appreciate that a ton. You've been a fantastic guest. You've really encouraged my heart. You've spurred me on. We are between churches. I haven't looked for a church in 30 years. And we made a decision 6 months ago to leave the church that I pastored. It's a great church, but I needed to get out of the way just so the younger leaders didn't feel like I was always, hanging around. And that's part of the type of church we're looking for. I hate to be a church shopper, but really want to find a church that has a deep compassion for the least of these. And really, it's so important, and it's so rare, I believe.
Yeah, we can talk offline. There's a number of churches, I believe, that are really trying their best to try something new. And, sadly, I think there's a lot of ways the church is taking steps away from the poor. And I'm glad to hear that you wanted to take a step towards, because I think from the beginning of Scripture to the end, you basically have in the Old Testament law that in the covenant community, there is to be no poverty among you. And in the early church in Acts 2 and Acts 4, the description of the early church is there was no poverty among them. They shared their possessions. I don't think Barnabas in Acts 4 heard a great sermon from his pastor on giving. I think he sat next to a single mom on the third row and said to his wife, "I'm not sure we need the second home in Vail. Maybe we should sell that and help this woman get a job," right? And he sold that, gave the money to the elders, and the elders knew how to get somebody out of poverty in the early church. So that's all I want to capture. People say, well, I hear those descriptions, it sounds like communism, and I'm like, I say, like, regardless of what you call it, wouldn't you want to be part of that church? I want to go to that church.
That's good.
That sounds like cool things happening.
No doubt about it. Yeah, you said something earlier. We'll close with this. Jesus was moved with compassion. And that's it. When we see people that are suffering, who are not flourishing, do we, as our go-to, that we assume it's somebody else's problem? Or do we pause and ask God, is there something you want me to do here? Is there a relationship that you want me to strike up here? Is there something I should do, not the next person? Whether that be me me and my wife, whether it be you and your family, whether it be your church. What's God calling you to do? Are you being moved with compassion when you see people who are suffering? Jason, thank you so much.
Dan, I want to say something right there. The pinnacle of Christian leadership is when you climb up on a bloody cross and take responsibility for the brokenness in your neighborhood. That's what we need.
Amen, brother. Amen. Remember, boys and girls, it's not about perfection. It's about direction. It's about going the direction of the cross, not getting stuck in perfection. I'm not sure I know what the next step is. Just take that next right step in the direction of compassion and watch God work. We'll see you next time on the Delay to Decay podcast.